You thought they didn't care because they went silent. You assumed their absence meant detachment, that their stillness meant your presence meant nothing. Well, what if I told you that silence, that emotional shutdown, that retreat, wasn't proof they don't love you, but proof they love you in a way they don't know how to handle? See, with avoidance, love is not a celebration, it's a battlefield. When love shows up, they don't run because it's meaningless. They run because it's too meaningful. And their nervous system doesn't know what to do with that. Their avoidance is not about you, it's about the emotional weight you awaken in them. A weight they've spent their entire life trying to suppress. Most people interpret silence as indifference. But silence in the avoidance world is survival. It's the only language they were ever taught when emotions became overwhelming. Somewhere in their past, love was paired with abandonment, with chaos, with inconsistency. So when love knocks on the door again in the form of your kindness, your consistency, your care, their instinct isn't to embrace it. Their instinct is to retreat from it. They disappear, not because they're calculating or cold-hearted, but because they are in an emotional storm they've never learned to walk through. It's not that they don't feel. It's that they feel too much and have no emotional infrastructure to hold it, so they shut down, they freeze, and they leave you staring at a blank screen, wondering what you did wrong. But the truth is, you didn't do anything wrong. You did something right. You made them feel something real, and that's what terrifies them. Avoidants don't show love the way others do. They don't express it in long paragraphs or midnight calls. Their love doesn't always look like connection. Sometimes it looks like distance. But that distance is loaded with emotion they don't know how to speak. You may think their silence is empty, but it's full of fear, full of longing, full of questions they don't know how to ask. Am I enough? Will they leave? Can I trust this? It's a silent war, not against you, but inside them. A war between the need for connection and the fear of it, between the desire to be seen and the terror of being known. And love, real, deep, vulnerable love, exposes them. It threatens their armor. It forces them to feel things they've suppressed for years. So they pull away, they shut down, not because they want to hurt you, but because they don't know how to not hurt themselves in the process. And here's the kicker. The more you matter to them, the stronger their reaction. The deeper they feel, the further they may run. Because love isn't light for them. It's heavy. It shakes the foundation of everything they believe about relationships, about trust, about safety. So if they've gone silent, if they've backed away after intimacy, don't be so quick to label it apathy. It might be a signal, a very loud one, that you've touched something they were never ready to feel. But here's the truth you need to hold. It's not your job to decode their silence. It's not your role to chase someone into their own emotional shadows. Just because their silence is full of emotion doesn't mean you must carry the burden of translating it. You are not responsible for someone else's healing. You're responsible for recognizing the difference between someone who doesn't care and someone who cares so much it breaks them, but refuses to break through. Let me leave you with this. Avoidants don't run from people who mean nothing. They run from people who mean everything. Their silence doesn't mean they forgot you. It means they can't stop feeling you. So don't ever confuse their emotional shutdown for a lack of depth. Sometimes the ones who say nothing are the ones screaming the loudest inside. And maybe, just maybe, that silence you hated, that distance that confused you, was the clearest signal of love they were ever capable of giving. Now the question is, will you keep waiting for a language they never learned to speak? And you're probably asking yourself, why do they pull away when things feel good? Why, when love starts to feel real, they suddenly go cold, distant, disconnected? It feels backwards, right? It feels like the closer you get, the more they vanish. But here's the truth that will change everything. An avoidant doesn't pull away because they don't feel love. They pull away because love triggers the deepest, oldest pain they carry. Let's talk about programming. Human beings are wired by their earliest emotional experiences. And if you want to understand an avoidant, you have to stop looking at their behavior and start looking at their blueprint. Their blueprint for love wasn't built on safety, presence, or nurturing. It was built on unpredictability, on inconsistency, on having to perform to be accepted or shrink to be safe. For many avoidants, love was not experienced as comfort, it was experienced as pressure. It was not warmth, it was exposure. Their caregivers may have been emotionally distant, or worse, loving one moment and rejecting the next. So the nervous system adapted. And that adaptation said, love is not safe, intimacy is a trap, vulnerability equals pain. So here's what happens when you, with your open heart and your consistent care, walk into their world. You activate the very thing they've been trying to avoid. You represent a healthy, deep connection. And that threatens the entire framework they've built to protect themselves. You may be loving them, but they don't experience it as love. They experience it as risk. And their body, their mind, their subconscious starts screaming danger. Now, this is why avoidants often respond to intimacy with withdrawal. It's not that they don't want love, it's that love doesn't feel familiar. They were never taught that closeness can coexist with freedom. They were conditioned to believe that being emotionally close means being consumed, trapped, smothered. So they do what they've always done, retreat. And let me be clear, this retreat is not a strategy. It's not some manipulative tactic to get you to chase them. It's trauma in motion. It's the past crashing into the present. It's their younger self taking the wheel and saying, we've seen this before, and we didn't survive it last time. That's why they ghost. That's why they shut down. Not because they're heartless, but because love is too much for a system that was built to survive without it. Ironically, they pull away from the very thing they crave. You see, every avoidant wants intimacy, but on their terms. They want connection, but not at the cost of control. And when love shows up with no conditions, no pressure, no manipulation, it scares them more than anything else because now they have no excuse. No reason to say it's too toxic. No reason to run, except that love itself feels unsafe. So what do? They retreat into the only safety they know, space. Distance becomes their drug. Because with distance, they can breathe. With distance, they can analyze. With distance, they're back in control. But deep down, they're not feeling free. They're feeling torn. They miss you. They think of you. But the weight of love is a language they were never taught to understand. And here's the paradox. The more they love you, the more they run from you. Not because they want less, but because they fear more. The more vulnerable they feel, the more they try to reestablish emotional safety, not by leaning in, but by pulling back. But let's get brutally honest here. This doesn't mean you should tolerate being emotionally starved, breadcrumbed, or strung along. Just because someone's fear is real doesn't mean you should sacrifice your peace to accommodate it. You can understand their behavior without endorsing it. You can have compassion for their pain without abandoning your standards. Because ultimately, love without emotional safety is not sustainable. You cannot build intimacy where one partner is emotionally starving and the other is emotionally hiding. At some point, the dance becomes destruction. So what does all this mean for you? It means stop taking their withdrawal personally. It's not about your worth, it's about their wiring. It means you can love someone and still walk away if their wounds are bleeding on you. It means you can hold space for someone's healing, but never at the cost of losing yourself. And if you remember nothing else, remember this. Just because someone learned to equate love with fear doesn't mean you have to keep proving that you're safe. Their healing is their responsibility, and your peace, that's yours. Let them heal in the space they crave, but make sure you're not breaking yourself to fit inside their fear. Most people assume love is obvious, that when someone loves you, you'll know. They'll say it, show it, prove it. But if you're dealing with an avoidant, love doesn't come wrapped in declarations or delivered with emotional transparency. It comes in shadows. It comes in patterns. And if you're not paying close attention, you'll miss the quiet signals that scream, I care, but I'm scared. See, avoidants don't love out loud. They love in fragments, in indirect movements, in checking your stories without texting you, in remembering something small you said weeks ago and bringing it up out of nowhere, in circling back after silence, not to talk about emotions, but to casually ask, how have you been? As if their emotional absence wasn't earth-shaking. This isn't game playing. This is survival behavior. They're trying to stay connected while keeping their emotional equilibrium intact. They want proximity, but only the kind they can control. So instead of leaning in, they hover. They linger in your orbit. They won't always reach for you, but they'll never fully let go either. Why? Because distance gives them safety, but closeness gives them meaning. And they're always dancing between the two. And this is where most people get it wrong. You look for love in the way you express it and assume that if it doesn't come back in that form, it's not there. But avoidants speak a different emotional dialect. Their love language isn't words of affirmation. It's presence without pressure. It's watching from afar because closeness still terrifies them. It's sitting with their own longing in silence because they don't know how to say, I miss you. That's why their patterns matter more than their words. Their behavior is the communication. You have to look at the consistency of their inconsistency. The way they always come back around, not to resolve, not to repair, but to remind you, I still feel something. I just don't know how to deal with it. This is the psychology of emotional proximity management. It's how someone tries to maintain connection without activating the threat of intimacy. Because for avoidance, emotional closeness feels like vulnerability. And vulnerability in their world often means loss of control, shame, or even abandonment. So they protect themselves by creating emotional distance while still clinging to the bond. You might notice them reappearing after you've stopped reaching out. They'll reactivate the thread, not because they're ready to love fully, but because they can't stand the thought of losing the option. That's not manipulation, that's internal conflict. Their attachment system is caught between craving closeness and fearing it, and they haven't yet learned how to hold both at once without panicking. Here's the paradox. The more subtle their efforts, the more profound the feelings. Avoidants rarely invest emotional energy in someone who doesn't matter. If they're checking on you, if they're maintaining some thread of connection, even if it's weak, it means something. You don't stalk the profile of someone you've forgotten. You don't monitor someone you've discarded. The fact that they're still in your space even silently tells you more than words ever could. But here's the line you have to draw. Don't confuse proximity with commitment. Just because someone is watching doesn't mean they're ready to engage. Just because they still care doesn't mean they're prepared to meet your emotional needs. And this is where your power comes in. Your job isn't to chase breadcrumbs hoping they'll turn into a meal. Your job is to observe the pattern, honor what it reflects, and then choose whether it's enough for you. You deserve a love that doesn't hide behind silence. A love that doesn't flirt with the idea of you, but fully shows up. If someone is only willing to orbit your life, but not enter it, recognize it for what it is. Fear expressing itself through distance. And while that may be real for them, it doesn't have to become your emotional prison. At some point, you have to stop decoding mixed signals and start translating them into self-worth. You can recognize their emotional limitations and still honor your emotional capacity. You can accept that they care and still walk away because their version of love isn't nourishing your spirit. So here's what I want you to remember. If someone can only love you from a distance, it's not your job to build a bridge. It's their job to learn how to cross it. Let's get brutally honest. When someone tests you emotionally, when they push you away just to see if you'll come back, when they pick at your wounds instead of exposing their own, it doesn't always mean they're toxic. Sometimes it means they're terrified, especially if they're avoidant. See, avoidants don't show love through words, they show it through patterns, through tension, through contradiction. Because real vulnerability, emotional intimacy, is like standing naked in front of someone without knowing if they'll judge, abandon, or destroy you. And for someone with an avoidant attachment style, that level of exposure can feel like death. So instead of saying, I love you and I'm scared, they unconsciously say, let me see if you'll stay when I push you away. Instead of admitting, I feel safe with you, they trigger you to see if you'll still choose them when they're at their worst. This is emotional testing and is often misread as manipulation. But there's a big difference between toxic control and trauma-based defense. Avoidants test the emotional foundation of relationships because they don't trust the ground beneath them. Love to them has always been conditional. If I behave a certain way, I'm accepted. If I'm too much, I'm abandoned. If I ask for needs, I'm punished. So what do they do when someone finally comes into their life offering real love? They test it. Not because they don't want it, but because they don't believe it's real. They might disappear just to see if you'll chase, not because they want you to beg, but because your pursuit confirms safety. It validates that they're still wanted, even in silence. They might act cold, detached, even dismissive, not to hurt you, but to confirm the same story they've always believed. No one stays, I'm unlovable, connection always ends. It's a preemptive strike. Self-sabotage before you get a chance to reject them. And yes, that behavior can be incredibly painful. It can feel like rejection. It can feel like emotional whiplash. But what if I told you those emotional traps aren't about you at all? What if I told you that they're actually signs of love too deep for them to handle? Love that threatens to unravel every survival strategy they've ever built. Avoidants fear the collapse of their defenses more than they fear loneliness. They'd rather be in control and emotionally starving than risk being fed and losing control. That's why they push boundaries. That's why they test your patience. Because every test is a question they're too afraid to ask out loud. Will you still love me when I'm not lovable? Will you still be here when I stop pretending I don't? Here's the psychological truth. People don't test what they don't care about. No one sets fire to a bridge they don't care to cross again. Avoidance only tests the people who matter, because your presence destabilizes the lies they've lived with for years. You become the exception to the rule they've clung to for safety. And that's terrifying. But here's what you have to understand, and this is where your power comes in. It is not your job to pass someone's unspoken tests to earn their broken love. You can recognize that someone's fear is real while still refusing to be collateral damage in their emotional war. You can see that they're hurting without letting them hurt you in the process. Because love, no matter how deeply it's felt, cannot thrive in manipulation, silence, or confusion. If someone's only way of feeling secure is by destabilizing you, that's not a relationship. That's a rescue mission. And you weren't created to be someone's emotional savior. So what do you do with all this? You stop taking the test personally. You stop trying to earn your place in someone's heart by proving your loyalty through their chaos. And instead, you start asking better questions. Does this relationship reflect my values? Does it nourish me emotionally? Am I being loved the way I need, not just the way they're capable? Because here's the truth. When someone tests your love more than they treasure it, it's time to stop proving and start protecting. Their fear is valid, but so is your peace. And the love you deserve won't need to see you broken just to believe it's real. This is one of the hardest things for people to understand. When you give love to an avoidant, real, nourishing, unconditional love, they often push it away. Not because they don't want it, not because they're playing games, but because receiving what they've always longed for goes against the identity they've been protecting their entire life. You see, avoidants didn't grow up associating love with safety. They associated it with pressure, obligation, even danger. And when that's your internal programming, love doesn't feel like warmth, it feels like vulnerability, exposure, a threat to the independence you've had to fight for in order to emotionally survive. So here's what happens. You show up, you offer care, you offer connection, you open your arms and say, you don't have to do anything to earn this. And instead of stepping into it, they pull away, they shut down, they may even act like you're the one doing too much. But behind that shutdown is something much deeper, something most people never recognize. Receiving love challenges the avoidant's core belief that they are not worthy of it. You have to understand how the avoidant mind has been shaped. For them, closeness has always come at a cost. Either they had to sacrifice themselves to receive affection, or they had to harden to protect their heart. So when you offer love freely, their nervous system doesn't interpret that as a gift. It interprets it as a glitch in the matrix, a violation of the reality they've lived in for years. No one gives without taking. No one stays without demanding. They don't reject your love because it's unwanted. They reject it because it doesn't fit the emotional blueprint they've been running on. In fact, the more pure and consistent your love is, the more it threatens their internal narrative. Suddenly, they're no longer the one in control. Suddenly, they have to reckon with the terrifying possibility that they've been pushing away the very thing they've always needed. And let's be real. It's easier to reject love than to sit in the discomfort of receiving it. Because to receive love without resistance requires a level of self-acceptance that many avoidants haven't yet developed. It means letting someone see them, not just the curated, distant version, but the messy, raw, vulnerable truth. And that is the most terrifying exposure of all. This is why many avoidants are more comfortable giving than receiving. Giving allows them to stay in control, to manage the level of closeness, to perform love instead of feel it. But the moment they're on the receiving end, when love comes with no transaction, no performance, no test, they freeze. Because now they have to confront every part of themselves that feels unworthy of being chosen. And here's the heartbreaking paradox. The ones who push you away the hardest are often the ones who need you the most. Not to fix them, not to save them, but simply to hold a mirror to their capacity for connection, something they've buried under years of fear and emotional survival. But let's be clear, just because you understand this doesn't mean you should tolerate being emotionally abandoned. Compassion without boundaries turns into self-neglect. You can recognize someone's struggle with intimacy and still decide that you will not be the emotional casualty of their unhealed trauma. Because here's the deeper truth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away, not out of anger, not out of spite, but to protect your own heart while giving them the space they need to confront theirs. And sometimes it's only in your absence that they realize the very love they ran from was the love that was real. So if your love is being rejected not because it's flawed, but because it's too powerful for them to hold, don't shrink yourself to fit inside their limitations. Don't stop loving. Don't stop giving, but give to yourself first. Hold space for their fear, but don't let it become your prison. And remember this, they didn't push you away because you weren't enough. They pushed you away because your love exposed how deeply they don't feel worthy of it. That's not a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of the walls they haven't yet found the courage to tear down. When an avoidant starts to care deeply, they don't become softer. They often become stricter. not just with you, but with themselves, and that catches most people off guard. You expect love to bring openness, vulnerability, maybe even chaos. But for an avoidant, the deeper they fall, the more they fight to maintain control. And the irony is heartbreaking, because the more they love you, the more they restrict themselves from fully experiencing that love. This is a person who's lived in survival mode. Love to them isn't safe terrain. It's quicksand. They've built their identity around self-reliance, autonomy, and emotional distance. And the moment you come into their world and crack that armor with connection, they don't celebrate, they panic. Now, here's where it gets misunderstood. Most people think emotional control means apathy. But when an avoidant starts micromanaging the relationship, when they suddenly need more space, more rules, more control over timing, pace, communication, that's not because they care less. It's because they care more than they can handle. They feel something powerful rising inside of them, something that threatens to overwhelm the framework they've lived by. And rather than leaning into it, they try to regulate it. Control is their coping mechanism. If they can control the structure of the relationship, they believe they can prevent themselves from falling too far too fast. It's not manipulation, it's self-preservation. Think about it. A person who's terrified of drowning doesn't jump into deep water, even if it's warm and welcoming. They inch in slowly. They build fences around the pool. They install flotation devices. They try to control everything, not because the water is bad, but because they've never learned how to swim in it safely. That's what love feels like to an avoidant. It's deep water. It's unpredictable. And control becomes their way of surviving the very thing they long for. So when you find them trying to define boundaries excessively, dictating the emotional tone of your conversations, or withdrawing to regain emotional equilibrium, it's not indifference. It's a defense against vulnerability. Now let's dig a little deeper. Why does vulnerability feel so dangerous to them? Because vulnerability is surrender. It's letting go of the illusion that you are in control of how deeply you feel, or whether the person in front of you will hurt you. And for someone who's been emotionally wounded in the past, that surrender feels like handing their heart over without a guarantee. It's emotional Russian roulette. So they try to make the relationship predictable, safe, contained. They'll suppress their emotions. They'll underplay their feelings. They'll avoid eye contact during deep moments. Why? Because the moment they let go,